A summary of the text. The story is about a home for orphans whom at Christmas are being rented to childless couples. Mrs. Overton is controlling the business part of the orphanage, while matron Mrs. Hathaway is taking care of the children and their appearances. The couples who use the settlement are very different, but they have one thing in common. They prefer little girls with bangs and dimples and small boys with cowlicks and missing front teeth. That means that the two preteens Mrs. Hathaway has brought down, because of her degree of compassion, does not get picked. Mrs. Overton is not happy about that because she knows the preteen boys are of no particular value and that no one wants them. Mrs. Overton does not give Mrs. Hathaway a reprimand because she is very satisfied with the day's proceeds. Mrs. Overton leaves alone while Mrs. Hathaway stays with the two unwanted boys.
A characterization of Mrs. Hathaway and Mrs. Overton. Mrs. Hathaway is the caring, compassionate mother figure. She is like a hen mother when she makes the orphans walk in a single file down the stairs. She has a lot of respect for Mrs. Overton, who is her employer. She is aware of the amount of power Mrs. Overton is possessing, but still she cares so much for the children that she is willing to step up for the two preteens because she thinks they deserve a second chance. Mrs. Overton is the head of the orphanage and all of the business. She is very cold and observes the children as objects instead of humans. She puts up a nice and smiling facade when she's talking to the customers, which is a bit fake because she's not acting like that at all towards the children and the matron, Mrs. Hathaway. She acts like she's better than Mrs. Hathaway, and it seems like she's a bit high class.
An analysis of the businesslike nature of the Christmas kit arrangement. It seems like especially Mrs. Overton and the customers are seeing the children as objects or an article. They are being judged by their appearances and not so much their personalities. The most wanted kids are the cutest and the most talented. The rest of them are being considered as leftovers for those couples who were not experienced enough to order the Christmas kit in advance. The businesslike nature really emerges when it comes to the payment. Mrs. Overton underlines the importance of the 48-hour agreement and makes sure that the couples know it is going to cost them extra charges, like $10 per hour, and that they will not get their insurance deposit back if they do not bring the child home to the orphanage in time. The expressions they use during the story also contribute to the businesslike atmosphere there are at the orphanage. All in all, you get the feeling that you are in a renting company, not at an orphanage filled with orphans.